They threw me out at 16, now they've come back to steal my life and I'm done playing nice. I was 16 when my life stopped feeling like a life and turned into survival. I still remember the day like it was carved into my bones. My parents stood by the door with my duffel bag packed for me, no warning, no conversation, just a cold command to leave and never come back. My twin sister Kayla 16F stood behind them, arms crossed, eyes blank, like I meant nothing, like we hadn't shared a womb, a childhood, a name on every birthday cake. The reason they kicked me out was as senseless as. It was cruel, a lie Kayla told about me stealing money from Dad's wallet, a lie that spiraled because it was easier for them to believe she was pure than to ask me anything. I had no chance to defend myself. They had already made up their minds, called me a thief, called me ungrateful, told me I was a shame to the family. They didn't care where I would go, didn't care that I had no money, no friends to run to, no one. So I walked out that door with my duffel bag and my heart pounding so loud I thought it would burst through my chest, and I didn't stop walking for hours, not until the sky turned black and the streets emptied and the cold set into my skin like frostbite. The first night I slept behind a gas station, curled under a plastic sheet I found in a dumpster. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I just stared at the stars and wondered what I'd done wrong. I kept asking myself that for months, through the rain, through the hunger, through every cruel night spent in public parks and filthy alleys and eventually a small clearing in the woods where I pitched an old tent someone had abandoned. That tent became my home, my coffin, my classroom, my prison. I learned how to steal without getting caught, how to lie without flinching, how to survive without a soul to rely on. I got odd jobs, dishwashing, loading trucks, picking up garbage, whatever would keep me alive. I worked until my fingers bled and my back gave out and my skin cracked from the cold, and still it never felt like enough. Every night I'd return to that tent, shivering, starving, forgotten by the people who once called me son and brother. I told myself I'd get out, I'd build something better. I had to, because if I didn't I would die there and no one would even know. I spent years clawing my way up from that pit, saved every cent, moved from tent to shelter, from shelter to a shared room in a rundown house with 4 other guys who all looked like they'd lost everything too. I didn't make friends, didn't trust anyone, didn't smile. I worked like a machine, studied at night at the public library, applied for courses, begged for financial aid. And when I finally got a scholarship to a community college I nearly collapsed from disbelief. I went to class every day like it was oxygen, worked night shifts at a warehouse, ate once a day if I was lucky, but I kept going. And eventually I graduated, got a job at a tech startup, slept in my own bed in a studio apartment for the first time in my life, and I cried like a child that first night, because it wasn't a tent, it wasn't a park bench, it was mine. Years passed, I climbed the ladder, bought a house, a modest one, but every inch of it was earned, every tile, every nail, every wall soaked with years of blood and silence and fury. I didn't decorate it much, just kept it clean, kept it quiet. It was my fortress, my proof that I'd made it out. I didn't speak to my parents, didn't look for Kayla, didn't want to know if they were dead or alive. I buried that pain so deep it became part of my spine. I thought it was over, I thought I could finally breathe, but I was wrong, so wrong, because monsters don't just vanish, they wait, they circle, and then they knock on your door one fine morning when the sun is out and the sky is blue and everything feels safe. That's when they strike. That morning I was in my kitchen making coffee when I heard the knock, not a friendly knock, not a curious neighbor, no, it was the kind of knock that carried entitlement, demand, and when I opened the door, there they stood, my parents, older, but still wearing that same sneer of superiority, and behind them Kayla, with a man I assumed was her husband, holding a baby carrier and 2 toddlers clinging to her legs. They didn't say hello, didn't ask how I was, they just said they were moving in. Because times were hard and I had the space, and before I could even respond, they started walking past me into the house like it already belonged to them. I stood there frozen for a second, the smell of my coffee still hanging in the air like a cruel joke. I couldn't even process it. My mother was already commenting on how small the place looked in the pictures, my father was asking if the guest room had a crib, and Kayla just looked around like she was inspecting a hotel she planned to complain about later. Her husband didn't say a word, just followed with his eyes low like he knew exactly how disgusting this all was but didn't have the spine to stop it. I didn't move, not until one of the toddlers reached for my bookshelf and knocked over a frame. the only photo I ever kept of myself, me outside my first apartment, grinning like an idiot, finally free. That sound of shattering glass broke whatever spell I was under, and I finally spoke. I asked them what the hell they were doing, my voice low, dangerous, because if I raised it I'd never be able to stop. I was shaking, not from fear but from the sheer weight of everything they had done and the nerve they had to show up like I owed them something. They turned to me as if I were the rude one, as if I had just interrupted their vacation. My father stepped forward and told me that families should always take care of each other, that they had nowhere else to go, that I had enough now. And it was my turn to give back. I laughed. I actually laughed out loud because the words sounded so ridiculous in their mouths. Give back. After what they did. After they left me to rot like trash on the side of the road. I reminded them I was 16 when they kicked me out, that I had lived in filth, begged for scraps, slept in fear every single night because of a lie Kayla never admitted to, a lie she stood by with that smug little smirk she still wore now. They didn't care, they brushed it off like it was ancient history. My mother told me I was being dramatic, that they'd had no choice, that I had been a difficult child, a troublemaker. Always brooding, always angry, as if that justified turning a child into a vagrant. I looked at Kayla and asked if she was ever going to apologize, if she remembered the day she lied, how she cried and pointed at me like I was a thief, like I was something to be disposed of. She didn't blink, didn't flinch, she just said she did what she had to do to protect herself, and that if I hadn't made myself so easy to blame none of it would have happened. The rage that hit me then was unlike anything I had ever felt. It wasn't hot, it was ice cold, steady, precise, like a knife under the skin. I told them they had exactly 5 minutes to get out of my house or I would call the police. My father puffed up like he used to, tried to remind me that he was still my father, that I owed them my success because without their tough love I never would have learned how to be independent. I didn't speak, just pulled out my phone and started dialing, and that was when Kayla's husband finally spoke, told me to calm down, said there were children here, as if that meant anything to me, as if their kids gave them some kind of moral shield to hide behind. They finally left, not with dignity, not with remorse, but with resentment, my mother whispering something about me being cold, Kayla shooting me a look like this wasn't over, like she still had cards to play. I didn't care. I locked the door behind them and stood there for a long time, heart pounding, breath shallow. I thought it would feel good, that kicking them out would bring some kind of closure. But all it did was rip open the scar I'd spent years covering up. I stood in that hallway for an hour, staring at the broken photo frame, wondering why it still hurt, why after everything I'd survived, their presence could still shatter me like glass. Over the next week they tried again, calls, texts, voicemails filled with guilt, threats, manipulation. Kayla's husband even came alone one day with a letter in his hand, saying they were being evicted and had no savings, that the kids needed a roof, that it wasn't fair to punish them for what the adults had done. He tried to look me in the eye but couldn't hold the stare. I didn't read the letter, just tore it in half and handed it back to him, told him that if they showed up again I'd file a restraining order. He nodded, said he understood, but I could see the same arrogance in him, the same entitlement they all carried, as if their suffering gave them permission to trample mine. I started feeling paranoid, like they'd find a way in, like they'd crawl through cracks in the walls if they had to. I added security cameras, changed my locks, told my employer in case they showed up at work, because I knew people like them didn't give up. They waited, they plotted, and sure enough I was right, because just when I thought the worst had passed, the real nightmare began. A CPS report, a welfare claim against me. Anonymous of course, claiming I was harboring minors in unsafe conditions. I knew it had to be them, no one else hated me enough to do this, and when the agent showed up at my door with a clipboard and a forced smile, I knew that whatever war I thought I had ended was only just beginning when the CPS agent stepped into my house, clipboard in hand, polite but with that rehearsed stiffness. I knew I had to stay calm. I had nothing to hide, no minors, no mess, no crime, just me, alone. In the quiet order I had built from ruin, but still, the questions came. Soft at first, then sharper, probing, like tiny knives disguised as concern. Was I housing children? Did I know that wasn't permitted under certain zoning laws? Had anyone recently moved in? Was there a dispute with family that could explain the anonymous tip? I answered everything without blinking, without letting the fury leak through my voice. and when they asked to look around, I nodded, even though every step they took through my space felt like a violation, like Kayla's poison had seeped into my walls without ever setting foot inside again. It took a full day for them to close the case, to tell me it was a misunderstanding, that the complaint had no substance, that I had nothing to worry about, and yet, the damage was done, not to my record, but to my peace, because now I knew they weren't going to stop. This wasn't about family, about survival, about forgiveness, no, this was war, and they had made it personal. I hadn't seen them since I shut the door in their faces, but their presence lingered, like smoke after a fire, like mold. In the walls, I could smell it in every corner of my house. I stopped sleeping, started checking my locks 3 times every night, stopped posting online, wiped my name from every site I could, because I knew if they found one crack, one weak spot, they'd flood it with all their rot and drag me back into the same darkness I'd spent years crawling out of. Then came the letter, not from them this time, but from their lawyer, or at least someone pretending to be one, some half-baked demand for emergency accommodation based on familial obligation, citing made-up laws and quoting religious values like it was the Constitution. I read it twice, folded it neatly, and then burned it in my sink, not because I was afraid, but because it was so absurd it didn't even deserve the dignity of a shredder. I could see their strategy now. They were trying to paint me as heartless, trying to force sympathy, trying to twist the narrative into a story where they were victims and I was the ungrateful, cold-blooded success story who'd abandoned them. And if there's one thing I knew from the years I spent in silence, it's that people love a victim, especially when the villain is someone who looks like they've made it. That same week I found out they were telling people in our hometown that I was unstable, that I had mental health issues, that the years on the street had broken me. They were trying to rewrite my story in real time, erasing the part where they kicked out a 16-year-old boy for something he never did and replacing it with this fiction where I was the one who left them, that I was always troubled, always angry, always distant. Even Kayla was in on it, telling her friends I'd threatened her kids, that she was scared for their safety, all lies, all carefully crafted to make her look like a mother defending her babies from a dangerous brother. I didn't respond publicly, didn't post any counter-story, didn't beg anyone to believe me. I just watched, collected everything, every message, every voicemail, every witness. I wasn't going to fight this with words, I was going to bury them in evidence, build a fortress so high and so solid that even the smallest whisper of their name would bounce off and fall into oblivion. I went to a lawyer, laid it all out, the eviction, the harassment, the false reports, the attempted forced entry, and most importantly, the smear campaign. My lawyer was sharp, quiet, and vicious in the best way. She told me we had a case, not just for harassment, but for defamation, for stalking, even for attempted fraud if the letter from their so-called lawyer proved to be fake. And that's when I smiled for the first time in weeks, because I realized I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was fighting back. I filed a cease and desist, sent it directly to their doorstep, made sure it required a signature, and then I waited. And oh, it didn't take long. The silence was deafening for the first 3 days, and then came the tantrums, first from Kayla, who left me a voicemail that was half sobbing, half fury, accusing me of tearing the family apart, of ruining her life, of abandoning my responsibility. I didn't even listen to it fully, just saved it for the file. Then my father called, not to apologize, but to warn me, told me I was making a big mistake, that blood always wins, that I'd regret turning my back on them. I hung up before he could finish and added his number to the block list. Then the bomb dropped, a social media post, made by Kayla's husband, a long, dramatic rant about how they'd been betrayed by a family member, how their kids were suffering because someone who had more than enough had chosen cruelty over compassion. He didn't name me, but everyone who knew us knew exactly who he meant. It went viral in our little town. People who hadn't spoken to me in years suddenly crawling out of the woodwork to ask what was going on. Some of them bought into it, sent me messages filled with guilt-tripping and thinly veiled threats. Others defended me, remembered how I vanished at 16 and never came back, how Kayla had always been the favorite, always the one who got everything, but it didn't matter anymore, because TH is wasn't about the court of public opinion. This was about survival, and I'd already won that once. I could win again the moment I knew it was truly over. Wasn't when the lawsuit was finalized or when the restraining order was approved. It wasn't when the defamation notice was served or when the apology letters stopped coming. It was when I looked around my living room one quiet night, untouched, undisturbed. No toys scattered across the floor, no shrill voices echoing through the walls, just silence and peace and air I could breathe without choking. That was the first time I felt safe in my own home since they came back into my life, and it felt like exhaling after holding my breath for 10 years. They didn't show up in court, not that I expected them to. The legal notice scared them just enough to back off, the fear of having to answer for their lies, of being forced to recount every twisted story they'd spread, it shut them down. Kayla deleted the post, her husband's account disappeared completely, my parents went quiet, not because they were sorry but because they had no more cards left to play, no more leverage. They tried guilt, manipulation, lies, public humiliation, even legal threats, and every single one failed because I didn't break, because I'd already broken once and there was nothing left to destroy. I kept working, building, living, and slowly the pain turned into distance, like a scar that doesn't ache anymore but still reminds you where the blade went in. I never replied to their final messages, never picked up another call, never acknowledged the birthdays or holidays or forced sentiments they tried to send through mutual acquaintances. I didn't hate them, not anymore. Hating them meant they still had a place in my life and they didn't. I had buried that part of my past in a grave so deep not even guilt could dig it up again, not even blood. A few months later, one of Kayla's old friends reached out to me. She said she wasn't sure if I'd want to know, but Kayla and her husband had split up, money problems, job loss, too much stress in the marriage. Apparently the man who once threatened me with righteousness couldn't handle the reality of raising 3 kids without a fallback plan, and Kayla, the queen of every room she ever entered, was now working part-time at a department store and living back with our parents, the same parents who had once clung to her every word, now resentful that she dragged them into this spiral. The golden girl turned burden, the perfect twin now a reminder of everything they'd lost. I didn't feel anything, not joy, not sorrow, just a strange kind of emptiness, like watching a movie where the villain finally slips, finally pays, but the credits are already rolling and you've already gotten up from your seat. I was out, I had my house, my peace, my life, and they had each other, just like they always wanted. The only difference now was they were finally forced to live with the consequences. The lies they built their world on had finally caved in, and I wasn't there to hold up the wreckage anymore. I never told my side of the story publicly, never posted some long explanation, never corrected the lies or defended myself online. I didn't need to, because the truth is patient, and it doesn't need permission to exist. The people who mattered knew what really happened, and the ones who didn't never really mattered at all. I stayed quiet, kept my head down, and slowly, the noise faded, the whispers stopped, the vultures moved on to other tragedies, and I was left alone, exactly the way I wanted. Every so often I still get the occasional message, someone who remembers me from school or the neighborhood, someone who heard the story and wants to say they're sorry for not speaking up, for believing them, for not noticing what I was going through, and I always say the same thing: it's okay, because I made it, I'm still here, and that's more than anyone ever expected of me, especially the people who were supposed to love me. So now I sit in this house I built with my own hands, surrounded by the silence they once tried to invade, and I breathe deeply and freely and fully, because I survived, not in spite of them, but without them, and I will never let them take that from me again. Tell me, was I wrong to shut the door on my own family, to lock them out after they tried to ruin me, not once, but twice? Or was it the only way to finally live? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this, because the past always finds a way back, but sometimes, you get to decide whether it gets through the door.